welcome to Florence and Flowers. This is the latest in our instructional tutorials, and this one is very much focused on how to make a fresh spring wreath, hopefully using one of the kits that you've purchased from us over at www.florenceandflowers.co.uk. So the purpose of today's video is to show you how to actually create your lovely fresh spring wreath using the things that are in your kit. So you should have a length of twine, you should have a reel of wire, you should have a nice fresh bag of sphagnum moss, which is nice and wet, and then you're going to have a selection of fresh foliage, some fresh flowers, some dried flowers, just all in nice spring colours, just to give you a lovely, fresh and sort of seasonal Easter type wreath. Okay, so to start off, we take our piece of twine and we're going to fix this onto our wreath ring, which will also be in your kit. And this is what you're going to use to actually hang your wreath on your door. So take your piece of twine, double it over, and then feed that loop underneath both of the rims of the frame, and then pull your tails through your loop just so that you're securing it like that. And then you can leave this as long as you want, depends whereabouts you want it to hang on your door. I would tie mine probably to about there, and then I would just tie the tails into a bow like so, just trimming off any excess. So you will need a pair of scissors, and the next thing you're going to do is take your reel of wire, unwrap just a short piece of it. Don't unwrap loads at a time, because if you do that it becomes quite unmanageable to work with. It has a tendency to get tangled. So just unwrap sort of a 20 centimetre or so length, and what you're going to do now is tie the reel of wire onto the frame. So we feed it under the rings again, and then just tying it round like that. This short piece of wire here, we're just going to wrap around the frame several times just to ensure that we don't have any nasty short pieces of wire that are going to scratch your door or your wall. Okay, so just wrap that round. So that should be on there now nice and securely. Again, keep it unravelled to about sort of 20 centimetres or so. And we're going to start to bind the moss on. So we've included a nice bag of wet sphagnum moss. The reason we use this is because, first of all, it's going to kind of make sure that your wreath looks nice and full, nice and sumptuous, but it also helps to obviously retain the moisture, which is going to help to keep all your greenery looking fresher for longer. So to get this onto the ring, just need to take a handful and sort of roughly lay it on top of the actual ring, picking up your reel of wire, and you're just going to bind that on by just fairly tightly. You don't want to leave this loose because you don't want the moss to escape, so you're just binding it nice and tightly on to the frame. Don't have to be really exact with this, you don't have to be really tidy. You're not going to see any of this at the end when you've got all your foliage on top. So it's really just a good opportunity to practice your binding skills, feel how tight you can pull that wire. You just want it to really be sort of securing all of that moss onto the frame. Hopefully having a nice even layer, sort of similar thickness all the way round. Okay, nearly there. So we're working all the way around the circle until we get back up to the top. To the top of the ring. Okay, lovely. So leave that wire on. You don't want to cut that off just yet. Any moss or anything that's left over, you can just push out of the way so that it's not impacting. Like I say, it doesn't need to be too tidy, so don't worry if you've got bits dropping off. You're not going to see them at the end. If you decided that you wanted a bit more moss in a certain place, perhaps like there where you can see that I've been a little bit rushed with it, just grab a little bit of whatever's left, pop it on top, and then bring your wire all the way back round. I'm sort of just quickly winding it round, and then get to the part where you need a bit more and just bind him on. And then bring your wire back up to the top. I think it's always useful to start at the top. It gives you a nice starting point when you're moving on to the next stage. Okay, so that's all on there, nice and securely. Push all the rubbish out the way. Lovely. So the next stage is to be getting on all of our material. We're going to bind everything on at the same time. We're not going to leave anything to the end and then try and poke it in later. We're going to use the same binding technique for everything, including our fresh flowers, our dried stuff, and so on. Hopefully you've soaked your foliage for a good hour or so after opening the bag or before you're ready to make the wreath, and that will really freshen it all back up and bring it back up to life. We've picked flowers that we know are going to dry really well. I mean, there's some really beautiful flowers out there that you could incorporate into a spring wreath, but the reality is after a day or two they're going to start to wilt, they're going to die, and actually they're not going to look very nice on your wreath for very long. Whereas something like a thistle, a billy button, some of this limonium, they're flowers that we would traditionally dry. So because they're ones that are suitable for drying, they're going to dry onto the wreath over time and still look lovely. Whereas some of the other varieties of spring flowers probably just wouldn't last for very long. So we're going to start by putting on foliage, and you've got a selection of different things. The contents of the kits do vary, but you will have been sent several different types of foliage. You want to cut things down probably to around sort of 20 centimetres, 15, 20 centimetres. That's a kind of good working size. So that means that some things you're going to be able to get more than one piece out of. So something like this ruscus, I would cut it there carefully, and then I can use that bit, and I can also use that bit, and that means I'm going to get a fuller wreath at the end. I make up a little sprig of foliage using a few different things. So I'm adding in a couple of bits of this beautiful eucalyptus. I've got a bit of ruscus and a bit of the pistache at the start there. Moving back over to my ring, I'm ready to bind my first section on. So I'm just holding that together nice and tightly in my thumb and forefinger, and I'm placing that on top of the ring like so. So you want your stems to be kind of sitting nice and neatly in the middle. So that's my outer ring, that's my inner rim, and I want those to be laying neatly on top of the moss in the middle. I don't want them to be pointing this way into the thing as I go round. I want them laying parallel and holding them nice and firmly. I'm picking up that reel of wire again, and I'm binding the stems, pulling it nice and tight so that I'm not going to lose anything. So when it goes outside on a windy day, you're not going to lose anything. I'm just pulling that around sort of 2 or 3 times so that those are nice and secure now against the wreath. Then I'll go back and I'll get some more foliage. So a piece of that, piece of that. Maybe incorporate some of your dried stuff. So this is some lovely baby pink ruscus, which is nice and sort of spring looking. And then I'm just going to pop that on as well. So this is kind of, I'm just going to cover up this inner ring of moss there. by just laying him on there. You can see his stems are in a similar place to where my first ones were. And just binding that on like that. Always make sure you keep your twine free. Sometimes you'll go round and you realise at the end that you've actually bound your twine in at the same time. If that happens, you can always just sort of wiggle it back out again, but it's easier if you make sure that you're keeping it clear while you're working. So going back and getting another nice bunch of foliage. So we've got this one here. Morning, hello. We're in the middle of filming an instructional video.
Oh, sorry.
We're going to start all over again.